All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you had a nice little short break and had the opportunity to get to know one another. In the meantime, we're going to move straight into our final panel for today. The previous two panels laid the foundation of big data and how AI and machine learning is helping companies to process and use their data. But while you're collecting it, and once you have it, what are the best practices when dealing with consumer data? People are increasingly becoming aware of the data they are sharing with companies, and new privacy laws such as GDPR in Europe are being put into place to hand over more control to the consumer. Let's find out from our experts how this is affecting companies in the Middle East. What are the best practices when dealing with consumer data? Your moderator for this panel has more than 18 years of experience working with local and global organizations. She holds 3 master's degrees in artificial intelligence, legal informatics, international business law, and cybersecurity. Please help me, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage founder and CEO of Hala Buhalwan Consultancy, Hala Buhalwan. Our next expert heads the Middle East legal team of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise in Dubai. He was recently chosen as one of the most influential general counsels in the Middle East by the Legal 500 GC Power List. Please help me, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage Regional Legal Counsel of HPE, Tariq Nakash. Our next panelist leads commercial business and product strategy, operations, financial performance, and marketing across all Microsoft businesses and segments. He has held several field and leadership roles in enterprise solution sales, product marketing, and technology across the company. Please welcome to the stage, ladies and gentlemen, the Chief Operating Officer of Microsoft Gulf, Ihsan Antabawi. Our next expert has 8 years of experience and held strategic roles in the IT and digital sectors and occasionally presents guest lectures. His personal experience spanned diverse fields such as development, implementation, marketing, and promotion of IT and digital technologies. Please welcome to the stage, ladies and gentlemen, the Head of Operations, MENA at InfoWatch, Mahmoud El Tabarani. Our final panelist for this day is currently leading analytics projects throughout the Americas and the Asian region. He frequently writes for journals and has published several books on technology. Please join me in welcoming to the stage the Managing Director of Intelligentsia Limited, Andrew Pearson. Ladies and gentlemen, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Omar.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Forbes, for having us. Thank you, everyone, for showing up today. I think Forbes, since morning, they've been thanking us. I think they deserve a round of applause. So please help me. Thank you, everyone. I don't want to miss anyone. Thank you, Lazan. Thank you, Daniel. Under the leadership of Khulud, thank you so much for having us. So, it's very interesting topic since morning, and I quite learned a lot. And I'm very happy surrounded by Ihsan, Tariq, Andrew, and Mahmoud today. This topic is very dear to my heart, and I think dear to everyone's hearts here. With everything being digitalized these days, whether our photos or our journeys or even our heartbeats, our personal information more and more are being collected, stored, traded by companies and by the government. What we should do about that and how we tackle the dangerous part of this thing. The objective of this panel is as much as possible to answer as many questions related to this topic, whether the impact of global regulations, local regulations, how to maintain data privacy, data security within our organization, how to protect our employees' data privacy, what is the aim of cybersecurity measures when it comes to cybersecurity, how to collect data, and what's the approach of those big organizations towards data privacy. So we hope as much as possible answer as many questions you have. Please feel free to set your questions through the apps you have. And without further delay, we would like to take the first poll question and then we kick off the panel. So are you aware of data privacy procedures within your organizations? Is it yes, is it no, or is it I'm not sure? I think time is out, or? Okay. Oh, okay. It's changing.
So 19 participants, I believe, and 63% say yes, and 21% say no, 15% are not sure.
Yeah, please participate, all of you.
Enjoy the spotlight.
Actually, that's a good indication. So we have 50% saying yes. No, it's not a good indication, and 41% saying no or not sure. So I think you're in the right place, and we'll kick off the session in order to answer this question. I'll start with Ahsan, coming from Microsoft, and we're hearing lots of news about Microsoft, whether this year or the years before. There are many legal cases where the legal courts could not take data from Microsoft, especially when it comes to court cases, which is happening live, due to protection of personal data, which Microsoft stick to, which is amazing. Saying that, what do you see the impact of the recent international regulations like GDPR, like CCPA, which impacts you directly?
Great, thank you, Hala. I don't know how this thing works. I'm going to probably have to bring it a bit closer. Can you hear me? Yeah, this feels a bit awkward, but as long as you can hear me. Okay.
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. So first of all, good afternoon. Thank you, Hala. Thank you, Forbes, for having me here today. I think this is a very timely conversation, and thank you for the leadership in having this conversation. And in today's landscape, when every aspect of our lives and our work is digital, right? Privacy is at the core of this. We at Microsoft believe that privacy is a fundamental human right. This is how we view the topic. This is how sort of serious we are about the topic. You mentioned some of the battles we've had with global governments. Many of them are our largest customers, but we're willing to actually fight those legal battles and advocate on behalf of our customers and consumers. So let me take a step back and address your question specifically. If we look at GDPR and more recently CCPA, there's really two overarching themes, just to simplify the topic. The first one is control, right? Both of them really strive to give the user more control on their privacy. So you as a user or as a company or as a consumer now have more rights to control how your data is being collected, how your data is being used, who is your data being given to, and in many aspects also request the deletion of records and what GDPR calls in some cases the right to be forgotten. CCPA has also some aspects to that. So control is the first sort of overarching aspect of this, and we'll see companies changing how they deal with data based on that control pillar. The second pillar is transparency. Right, both GDPR and CCPA require companies to be much more transparent in how they deal with data, right? So you have to disclose to the user what data you collect, but also be very, very specific about how the data is being used. So those are the two things, control and transparency. If you look at what we do at Microsoft, when GDPR was enacted in 2018, it really only applied to the EU. What we did is we went further. We were the first company who voluntarily announced that we will respect GDPR globally for all our customers worldwide. So although we were only required to comply within the EU, we announced that we're going to apply GDPR globally because we believed what it called for is really very, very valuable to all our customers globally. Just 2 days ago, I know many of the audience members know that CCPA applies to California, the state of California. What we did 2 days ago is we announced that we're going to apply this to all our customers in the US. So not only in California, but we were the only tech company that announced that for all customers in the US, we will apply CCPA. And if you look at CCPA, it's quite interesting. It actually specifies very specific cases. So again, it defines what companies this applies to. So for example, if you're a company that deals with 50,000 sort of consumer records or more, or generate $25 million of revenue, or generate over 50% of your revenue from selling consumer records, then you're within the scope. But we expect the scope to even be lessened, that it will apply to broader companies. And it touches many of the aspects I spoke about, which is control, transparency, the right to delete data, etc. So this is how we look at the issue. It's very broad. Whenever something is introduced that impacts a certain jurisdiction that we believe has value globally, then sort of we will take it, we will adopt it more globally because we truly believe this is a fundamental human right.
Thank you, Ahsan. Thank you.
Pleasure.
And actually, you have a tough job being in Microsoft. It's a platform everywhere, which is extraterritorial, and this makes it more complex even. So thank you for the insights.
Pleasure.
Tariq, going to you, being a lawyer and working in the UAE, like I face it all the time when I talk to clients. They find data privacy laws in the UAE are either not complete or missing or not clear. Or sometimes they say, let's rely completely on GDPR or international laws. What's your insight on that? Where do you see UAE laws in terms of that?
Thank you. So as a starting point, there's no unified general data protection law in the UAE. And there have been discussions around issuing a law. Minister of Finance had been discussing the telecom regulation authorities as well. And I believe that eventually we're going to see a unified law for data protection, probably mapped on the GDPR, but with more focus with local sensitivities in terms of security and what have you. But having said that, if there are other laws for data protection. So we have the law from the Dubai International Financial Center. They have their own law, the ADGM, Abu Dhabi Global Markets. There's a law also for the Dubai Healthcare City regarding medical records. And the overarching principle for data protection is in the penal code. So Article 379 of the Penal Code states that a person cannot disclose a secret or use a secret without the consent of another person. And so basically what's a secret is not really defined, but has been accepted generally as data, and data in terms of personal data. And so in addition to the Penal Code protects the dissemination and the transfer and the control of data, and there's penal sanctions if someone violates that. There are other also laws. So the central bank issued in 2017 data protection regulation regarding payment service providers. There's also the Dubai data law, which regulates how data is transferred within the government entities. And so there are sets of laws that regulates data. But when it comes to personal as an individual, as you rightly said, it's very difficult for me to know which law applies to me. There's the cybercrime law, where I'm sure you've heard if you've been living here, where there's an article which has been used. If you take a picture of someone and then you post it without their consent, then you're in violation of the data protection laws in the UAE. And so as a general principle for me as an individual, I just have to make sure the one important aspect is consent. That when I'm sharing as an organization or as an individual, that I would require the consent of the other party before I share or process this data.
Thank you, Tariq. So talking about regulations, we heard the international perspective, we heard the local perspective. Mahmoud, going to you, after hearing the insights from Tariq and Ahsan, what's your advice to maintain data privacy within organizations?
First of all, thank you for the hosting. Thanks for Forbes was us also hosting here today. So it's a kind of related question, which is the laws and the data itself. You cannot protect the data inside an organization without knowing what is this data. First of all, you need to understand what is the type of data you have. You need to classify it. You need to understand who have access to it, whether this access is granted by power users, whether it's access granted by legit way, by incorrect way, and so on. Based on this type of filtration, now you understand what you need to protect inside your organization. Comes the second part, which is the human factor. Human factor can do mistakes, because we are all humans, and can do it intentionally. So the data, if it's processed correctly via rules inside the organization, you will have less chance of having a data leaked or data loss or data exposed to the incorrect channels. So the main important part, after classifying and understanding what is your data inside the organization, you need to make the awareness of employees, how to correctly follow the procedures, how to correctly follow the steps assigned to deliver the data outside the organization using the removable device and so on. At the same time, you need to learn them what is the basic elements of security, what is the correct strong password, for example. It might be very simple things that everybody need to understand, but believe me, based on InfoWatch experience, when we go for some of the clients, they actually don't know what type of any information they have. They just have a storage location where everybody throws everything there. They don't know how to access, who is accessing it, who's auditing it, who's controlling it, and it's just a chaos. So based on the education of the employees, you will be able to handle the data correctly. After completing this part, only then you will start to look for the layer of security with multi-authentication and all of this multi-factor authentication, permissions, and so on and so forth. So step by step, in order to protect your data in short term, so I don't repeat myself, you need to understand what type of data, create the diagram of data flow inside the organization, make sure the users and the human action is correctly implemented. You need to invest in the human factor more than investing in solution. If you invest in solution and you buy the best IT information security system in the whole global idea, without the correct usage, it will be inaccurately used to protect the data. That's in a short term. So.
Absolutely, thank you so much, thank you. Actually, with what I'm hearing and what we always hear like in articles or on the news, there's always focus on the client's personal data. And this leads me to a question to you, Andrew. Like, we tend to forget sometimes employees' data privacy, which is very important. They
Indeed.
are our clients at the end of the day.
Some
so
ways they're more
how we
important.
preserve that?
I want to start with a quote and an analogy. So the quote is from B.F. Skinner, who's a famous American psychologist from the 60s and 70s. And he said, he did a lot of work with lab rats. And he said, the major difference between working with rats and humans is rats actually learn from experience. So, one of the problems I think we have as humans is we're dealing with people who don't always, we have to teach them again and again and again. The analogy is, one of the biggest things about humans is we trust. We're very trusting. And I'm sure many of you have seen the classic vampire movies where there's a vampire standing on the edge of the house and he's saying, aren't you going to invite me in? And everyone in the audience knows, don't do it, the vampire's going to come in if you do, and basically, cause havoc. And the people on the end of the employees, let's say, those are the ones that trust, in many cases, a lot of the phishing emails that are coming in. They're the ones that invite the problems in because they maybe don't have the education or the skills to understand the problems that could actually open up with that. So we have to understand there is this environment that it's not kid gloves, but it's basically be very, very cautious with your data and with your people. An example from the airline industry that we were working on kind of talks about the importance of data and the importance of use of data and how it can help the companies, in this particular case, it was an airline. And every one of us here flies, and we all understand that the captain is the one that if he says, I need X amount of tons of fuel, then the plane's not going to take off unless it gets that. So this airline actually was able to, I think one of those 380s produces 2 terabytes of data for every flight. So basically, what they decided to do, because they had a lot of captains who were a little older, very set in their ways, and they were very much, I need this amount of fuel to get from KL to Singapore, KL to the US. So what they did was they implemented, they just put simple iPads in all of the cockpits and actually quantified every single, maybe like 10 stages of the flight to see how much fuel was being used. And it was a case of the pilots would actually compare themselves against each other and then say, oh, okay, it doesn't make me look good that I'm the biggest, user of fuel. So these are kind of examples where it's less on the privacy side of things, but more on the companies have to use the data because that's their business, right? They save millions of dollars by doing that. The flip side is we have companies like Humanize, which are basically putting sensors on people, so they're tracking everywhere a person goes. They're tracking everyone they're talking to. Hitachi is doing the same thing. BP now is actually forcing people to use, or allowing people to use Fitbit. So if you don't want to use Fitbit, you have to pay a monthly $20, I think, and it's basically to keep track of how healthy you are. And I think we have to look at there's a happy medium here, and we have to be very cognizant of what that medium might be. And yes, there's privacy involved. I work in China a lot where there isn't much privacy and people don't understand the concept of privacy. So it's very interesting to see whether that's going to help them kick off, become an AI superpower, or if there's many other things that are more important because health is nice, it's good to have very good health, but it's also a question of, do I want my company following me everywhere I go and seeing how many steps I take and all of these kind of things. So it's a very interesting space, and yeah.
Thank you. I love the examples. Actually, you made it very clear. We can visualize how it happens. Thank you.
I used to write scripts, so
yeah.
I try to keep a good story.
Great. Ahsan, going back to you, actually, I'm curious towards a topic which happens with me personally. January 2018, I was working on a case which we had to use a precedent from a Microsoft case, where there were several data breaches, cybersecurity breaches, fraud breaches in the US and outside the US. Until this date, and this happened several years, till this date, as I mentioned in the beginning of the panel, they couldn't take one single data out of Microsoft servers outside of the United States because of the data privacy laws. Since you are from Microsoft, I would like to hear from you personally. What's your approach towards data privacy? How do you maintain all that?
Thank you. So there's a few things that I'd like to share. Like I said, we believe privacy is a fundamental human right. There's really no other way to look at this. And to your point on trust, there's no trust without privacy, right? So, and as people put more of their lives online and in digital technology, they need to trust that technology. And today, I would argue, there's a moment in tech where there's a, sort of a lack of trust in the environment, and we need to all come together as an industry to restore that trust. And what's happening today in the global tech landscape is there's maybe 4 or 5 players today that are part of the world's critical infrastructure that really sort of influence a big part of your daily digital experience. It's both an opportunity and a responsibility, right? We're one of those companies. We sort of manage one of the world's largest hyperscale cloud infrastructure platforms. We recently brought it here to the UAE, so we have our local cloud data centers here in the UAE. But back to your question, in everything we do, we have 6 privacy principles. So there's six principles that really govern everything we do in tech, and I'll walk you quickly through those 6. And I really encourage you to also look at them and see how many of them you can apply in your own organization. So the first one is control. which is what I alluded to earlier. Control means we want to give the end user control over their privacy by giving them easy to use tools, but also clear choices that they can make. So that's principle one, control. The second principle, also mentioned earlier, is transparency. We will always be transparent about data collection and use so that companies and users can make informed decisions. And again, the cases you referred to, we were very transparent about our policies, about what we cannot disclose. So that's also very, very key. So control, transparency. Third is security. And I think you mentioned this earlier, is you can't really have privacy without security. So the data that you entrust us with, we protect it with the strongest security, world-class encryption. You want to make sure that with privacy, there's also world-class security. Fourth is very strong legal protection, right? That's the point you mentioned, is we're willing to fight and advocate on your behalf when there's a legal dispute that arises, right? So we will both respect the laws or your local privacy laws. Again, one of the things we do with our local data center in the UAE is we adhere sort of to the local regulations, but at the same time, we will uphold our own sort of legal privacy regulations, even if it meant, going to legal battles and legal fights on behalf of our customers. Fifth is no content-based targeting. So we commit that we will never use your email, your chat, your files, or any personal content for targeting ads to you. And quite frankly, we're one of the few ones that have the advantage to do this because of our business model, right? Our business model does not depend on consumer data, does not depend on monetizing consumer data, does not depend on advertising. So that's actually one of the benefits of having a cloud vendor that has this baked into our business model. So that's one of our principles. And lastly, number 6 is benefits to you. So when we collect the data, we do it in the context of how do we improve your experience? How can it benefit you? So for example, can we give you more contextualized recommendations? Can we give you experiences that are tailored for you? So those are the 6 principles, and you alluded to one of them, but you can expect us to apply them everywhere we do sort of business. And I wanted to list them, and I know it's a lot of detail, because it is a multidimensional topic. It's very complex. You really have to look at it from multiple aspects. So I hope this gives you some color. Yeah, go ahead.
Throw in something on that. There's an interesting thing called the privacy paradox, that apparently they've done studies now, and they find that people are, the more you put your life on social media, the more you want privacy, which is kind of an odd paradox. But it's obviously, I'm sure all of you have an Instagram account, or most of you do, and it seems like, if you want to share, you're kind of taking the privacy out of it. But once again, the complexity of the human mind and the human beings. So
absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we're all in a privacy paradox, all of us. Yeah.
Getting deeper and deeper.
Yeah. Tariq, going back to you, we always stress on education and awareness in everything we do. And as a lawyer, I know, like, when you want to implement something or you want to convince others to implement something, this is the main door to convince them. How do you see the impact of education and awareness in this particular field?
I think as a start, the saying that prevention is the best cure, right? So education and awareness is extremely important. If you look at the question that you've asked at the beginning, and I'm happy that the ratio was 60-40, because that actually reflects the reality on how many of us know what are our organization's data privacy policies, or how do they protect our data. And coming back to Hassan, who said at the beginning, so we can see the disparity a little bit, he said that data protection is a fundamental human right, right? This is what he said. Yep. And Andrew said that in China there's no culture yet for privacy. So I think here we're in the between, right? So the education starts from a very young age, from the age of our children, when they're accessing YouTube, or accessing Instagram or Facebook. They need to know how to use security in terms of passwords, what to post, what not to post, right? And so this data that what they're sharing, what they shouldn't be sharing. And then it goes to the universities, where there should be also initiatives around education and awareness around privacy. I think in Australia, the data commissioners there, they launched a game, online game, And by the game, you play the game, and at the end you have questions on data protection, and you have to kill, or I don't know, you win some stages for the to reach at the end where you can at least answer 5 or 10 questions and know and win the game. So there are lots of issues that can be played around. The role is on all of us, on governments for sure, on NGOs to keep on raising awareness around these subjects, and on companies. So, for example, at HPE, every single employee, when they join, they have to go through the standard of business conduct training, and that training has a big section on data protection and on cybersecurity, and we always have as a requirement to keep on in our daily employment, you have to go through trainings on cybersecurity and make sure we understand the effect of data privacy as well. And so, coming back to the question that was raised, the role of organizations is for sure, and companies, to educate their employees by training, by constant training, by constant emails, and let the employees know their rights. As well for the governments, if you look at the consumer protection in the UAE, whenever you go and buy something, you say know your rights. These initiatives should also spread to data protection.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you. Mahmoud, going to you, it's always confusing whenever we have discussion about cybersecurity versus data security. Some people, they find it very interconnected. Some people find it's separate. Some countries, if you look at the regulations, you will see cybersecurity laws alone, data security laws alone, and there's no connection between them. Some of them, they refer to each other, you know, some clauses here, clauses there. Some of them, they combine it. What do you see the impact of cybersecurity on data privacy?
Wow. So let's agree that cybersecurity as a concept itself does include many other things beside data security. Having them separated 100%, it will not be possible. In the same time, you cannot compare them like apple to apple. I personally, I feel that cybersecurity is like the group of items, and data security is one of them, because the channels of accessing this data is one part. The data itself is another part. The compliance, PCI DSS, HIPAA, and all of this, it's regulation in general, it's another part. Penetration testing is another part. It's all of these parts gathered together, it's a cybersecurity. Without having a proper education, proper tools, proper awareness what is cybersecurity, you will not do the correct policies and correct internal methods of data security. When it comes to data security, let's agree that in any organization, the first hour after a data breach is the most vital hour of any business. So in this hour, you need to be prepared what exactly you are going to do in regard of your data. So originally, you need to have, let's say it in a more technical term. I like the technical terms better than the trained words, you know. I like the actuality, the facts. For example, if it's your data, make sure that it's encrypted correctly across your devices, because you have the bring your own device concept, you have the mobile phone, social media, and all of these things. You need as much as you can to make your data encrypted. At the same time, you need to have it backed up correctly, because after 1 hour of breach, this breach, either it's a data leakage or it's a data erasing or other part of the things. So one of them is to have a backup to know, to understand, or it can be a data manipulation. So they can log in, change data access, change numbers, change figures inside it, and you will know later on. So when you go to compare it to the original one, you have nothing to compare. So you need to have a backup for this data. The hardware aspect for data, many people will think that the hardware is not related to the data, and the opposite. Any hard drive or a mechanical hard drive at the moment, or I don't know, let's say it like this, once you remove it from a machine, and let's say you deleted everything or you format everything, it's not cleared yet. Unless you get a drill and you put a hole inside it, this is actually removing the data. The correct recycle part of your old hardware is an essential part of protecting your data, because there is a lot of other tools, other methods. The human behavior is always creative. Let's agree on this. Because when the humans or the persons put something in his mind, he will find a lot of ways. He can go to the supplier, which is providing you with this, and reaching items from different ways. You need to have a multi-layer of security. So you need to buy multiple information security systems, but you need to know how to use it correctly. I'm trying to put a lot of information in short time, but I hope it's clear that without the correct investment in the human education for cybersecurity awareness, you will have a lot of issues internally in your organization. You need to educate the staff. You need to talk to your IT people. They are not the guys who will answer your phone calls just to change your keyboards or mouse or whatever. They are people that you need to understand what is their issues and how they can fix it internally in order to get an overall result of data maintenance under the cybersecurity umbrella.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very insightful. This brings me actually, Andrew, the question is for you. Whenever we see a tsunami of regulations or a complex, let me call it paradox, which you mentioned, there's always, and the regulator is still testing how to draft the law, the regulation, the practical measures. They use those general words or generic terms or elastic terms, just maybe because they don't really know yet the borders of how to implement the regulation. So for example, in early 2000s, when compliance came to, like, it was the talk of the town, compliance, money laundering, terrorist financing, they started saying that every organization need to have a robust procedure in place. Then early 2010, UK Bribery Act came to force the same thing. Every organization needs to have a robust policy, secure measures in place. Now same thing with data privacy. That every organization needs to have a robust data security in place. How do you define that? It's very generic. Like, how do you, what insights you can give us?
So, and I think one of the big words they use right now is reasonable. They have to have a reasonable defense, which, you know, that's a nice, vague, lawyerly term that, you know, leaves a lot of room for hedging. And, you know, if you look back in I think two things are interesting to look at. Historically, the whole data privacy actually started with the 1974 Privacy Act in the US, which was right after the impeachment of Nixon, which is kind of interesting now that we're in these times again. And you can see why privacy was such an important thing in America at that point. But if you look at historically some of the legal judgments as well, and maybe you can touch upon this as well as I at the end of what I say, there were a couple of legal judgments in America that might lay the groundwork for something with data privacy laws going forward. One of them was two tugboat companies, actually this was like the 20s and 30s, and they were using, at that time shortwave radio was the big technology, was the internet of the day, I guess. And these tugboat companies didn't bother having shortwave radios. And they got sued because they hit a storm and the storm sunk all the boats. So the company that was having, you know, basically being towed sued them, and I think it was the Supreme Court in the United States said, you know, for the minimum price of a shortwave radio, you really should have done that. You really should have bought it. So we may be looking at a point right now where I think the average cost of a hack is about between $4.5 to $7.5 million, which is quite a lot. But, you know, when you have billion-dollar corporations, there's a lot of companies out there that say, let me take the risk, because I think 1 out of 100 it gets busted and gets all the bad news. And the bad news comes out, I think Target spent $10 million to settle the civil and $100 million to settle with the Visas and the Amexes of the world. And yeah, 110 million is a lot of money, but it's not going to put that company out of business. So they'd kind of rather deal with the PR, the bad PR for 6 months, and then, you know, basically go to the customers and say, you know, look how much better we are now and trust us now. So it's, the second one was a case that was more recent, and it was a woman who was living in an apartment and she got attacked. And her argument was the people who owned the building should have actually provided some security. And the courts agreed. So if we look at the landlord-tenant in this part, it would be basically the companies that control the data. And we can't really say that you're not making money on this data because, you know, I think 5 out of the 10 biggest companies in the world right now by market cap are tech companies like Google, Alphabet, and Apple. So yeah, did you have anything? Is anything happening in the Middle East in terms of legal structures, legal tort reform?
Yeah, I think in terms of, the tort here is a bit more complex than, it's not the same regime as in the US. But coming back to your point in terms of making sure there should be adequate security measures, this is applied by everyone here, not from a legal perspective, but from a business perspective, because everything is connected. So even now, with the air condition, you can hack the air condition if it's connected. So
IoT.
So yeah, it's a very, very important topic.
And if you look at the IoT, that's going to be the next big one. AIoT is another big one. But we're looking at, you know, it's one thing to have your systems locked down, and it's a completely other thing if you've got IoT, all these little things talking to each other, and it's going to get a lot more complex and probably a lot more expensive if we fail at it. So.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you for the insight. I think we have interesting questions from the audience. Can we please view these questions on the screen? Okay. So I think I'm going to stand up just to be able to read. Do you think GDPR can be implemented in the UAE? What tweaks should be considered considering the cultural elements of the country? I'm just looking.
Yeah, I can answer that. So yeah, of course, no law can be applied as it is because the GDPR came after. It's not that the first data protection law in the EU. There have been since 20 years laws. So it came as a after practice and after people have knowing what's data protection, what's the data protection commission, and how the sanctions are made. So the concepts of GDPR, and coming back to what Ihsan said, in terms of control and protection and transparency, for sure, they can be applied locally. But as I said at the beginning, with looking into the local culture, especially for government entities, most of our businesses here are owned one way or another by the government. There are some sensitive data. So it can be applied for sure, but it has to be localized.
Yeah, and if I may build on that, here's the interesting thing about again the global economy we live in. It's very interconnected. I mean, even if you're not an EU established business, but you deal with sort of European citizen data or you sell services to somebody in the EU, there's a lot of companies here. I mean, I can't remember the figure. I think the EU sort of trade volume last year was 32 billion dirhams. So it's a significant trading partner. So again, GDPR specifically, even here, it applies. It applies to businesses that operate here, that deal with data for European citizens. But I think the principles of it, to your point, will have to, will be implemented in one shape or form here, right? Specifically, given the sensitivity of the data for many of the regulated industries that are here.
So if the question, if you understand the question correctly, maybe it has two sides.
Yes.
One of them, whether we can enact the law like the GDPR, and that's yes for sure.
Yes.
And the second one, as Ihsan has said, is the overarching principle, the overreach.
Yeah.
So can a business here be liable for the GDPR infraction? Yes, under certain conditions if they're targeting
That's
EU
the
citizens.
tweaks. They were asking for the tweaks. This
Yeah.
is exactly the tweaks which should be done. Perfect. I bought a villa from, now my number is out with everyone and I can't stop getting random calls. How can we ensure the privacy? I think this is the same person who asked about the villa in the first panel, second panel, and no one answered them. So
common
let's
problem.
answer them. So can we ensure, how can we ensure this privacy?
Can we repeat the question again?
I bought a villa from somewhere. Now my number is out with everyone and I can't stop getting random calls. How can we ensure this privacy?
It's a difficult question, but we're not giving legal advice here. But I would say, first of all, you need to know who's contacting you. If random numbers, you need to save them. And perhaps go to the Consumer Protection Authority.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be it. If you go to the Dubai, Department of Economic Development in Dubai and tell them I've been harassed, let's say, and someone is keep
I
on...
think this is in the next layer when they reach the level of harassment. But
Yeah.
you said before that prevention is the best cure. So in case if you are using your internal information, just let me put idea. Yeah, it's better to share or buy a number or contact information that you have no problem being exposed outside as a temporary solution and have your private life separately.
Yeah, and I think, look, I mean, it's a common problem. I think it starts with asking the company you're dealing with, show me your like, how do you handle information? Show me your privacy policies. Ask those questions, right? I mean, do they even have a privacy policy in place? Do they follow certain guidelines? Because I can tell you, a lot of the agents and the companies here don't necessarily have something in place, right? And a lot of the things we're discussing today puts the sort of the burden on the user. That's why we're sort of pushing for more accountability. I mean, I love the analogy you mentioned of the building and the apartment. There needs to be an accountability for that organization, where you share your data first. So I think until that happens, you're going to continue to see some of those issues. So I think I would ask, like today, I'm making it a practice whenever I share my data with a non-global, I would say, organization, is to look at how they handle these things, really question, right? So I think there's also a role we can play there.
To know your rights.
Can we have, sorry, the questions back?
And also, maybe you play the game with them as well. You don't need to use your business email. You know, you can always have additional emails, maybe a burner email. You know, I use every now and then if I sign up for something that I, don't want them to respond to me, as I know they'll put me on some list or sell me on some list too. So, it is a game with them in many ways too, so.
Yeah, I think, just if I may comment, I think this is a common problem. It's beyond the organization level because we should have a national governance for data privacy because yes, we have regulations. Sometimes it's not enforced as it should be. So as an organization regulated, I'm not that afraid to share because the enforcement is not that strict. So also enforcement is a little bit, not little bit, actually needs tweaking. The third question, how do I ensure that somebody who says they won't share my info is not actually sharing my info? I think it's very related to the villa question. Do we still consider a data without the name of the related person a private data? And this is actually, so in other words, which data is considered private data?
I would say, yeah, you still consider it private data because there are ways that you can actually figure out who that person is in multiple ways. So, and there's a lot of work going on right now in AI, facial recognition. In China, they're using gait recognition, so they actually don't even need the face, they just look at the walk. I know the Pentagon is actually they're going to be able to shoot a laser to your heart here, and they'll be able to figure out who it is just by your very specific heart rate. And I know there's a lot of emotional recognition technology going on that, once again, in many ways, you may think it's anonymous, but it's really not.
Any other insights on that?
I think all the data considered private because it might be not private as per a person, but it can be at a group of people, for example. Based on statistics gathered, you can know ahead of the future that your product is in demand in the market. So you will monetize it based on the data you gathered because a group of people will buy it. So your data, even though it didn't identify you as a person, it identified your needs or identified where you are geographically located or near-sighted to it. That's why the big data trends and the security regulation around such type of events or topics are highly in negotiable states because it's not well handled yet. It's an ongoing process.
That's excellent. Also, I think regulators, I'll add regulators need to define personal private data, because in many regulations it's not defined, which allows organizations to escape the implementation of the regulation, because it's not under private data how it's defined.
And we're also in a business, or at least I am, software business, where the market actually rewards companies that are first to market. They don't reward the companies that are the most secure to market, right? They say, put it out there, and a lot of times in the development, you don't do enough beta testing just because you want to get it out there. So, yeah, so it's a tricky space.
Perfect. I think we're on time. Mahmoud, Andrew, Tariq, and Ihsan, big thank you.
Pleasure.
It was amazing. I learned quite like a lot today. And great insights, and I personally enjoyed a lot. I hope everyone enjoyed the session, and I'm sure you have, yeah,
Question.
perfect.
Sorry, 1 second. We'll give you the mic right behind you.
Because of the cybersecurity.
See, I have put a question, but it was removed because I think the person did not understand the question. See, in cybersecurity, data are the vital part, correct?
Okay.
What is happening today? There are agencies, those who hack the data. Now, human being is going to get impacted very badly. For example, if I have a pacemaker, you hack my pacemaker. Today I have a diabetic here, for example, my monitor. You can hack this thing. Tomorrow hologram will be there. Chip will be there. When all these devices will be fixed in your body, and if there are no policies, that means anybody can hack and anybody can take away your life. I want to know your comments on the same.
Is it a
Wow,
specific
that's a
person,
heavy
or it's just
question.
to me?
Very good one. Yeah.
It's to anyone, or just to me, because he was
Whomever wants
looking to
whomever wants to, and I think like we can go afterwards to Tariq. He mentioned Dubai Healthcare City laws, so we can.
No,
First, if you want, Mahmoud. Yeah.
Okay, so in summary, you want to understand how you can protect yourself against the cybersecurity when you have critical items related to your well-being from being hacked, yeah? Okay, so technology is a two-way weapon. It will be used in favor and it will be used against, as long as you have good people and bad people, you know? It's your part to understand how to correctly at least minimize the damage you may get exposed to. So if you are going to get a pacemaker, yeah, for your heart, go for a trusted company. Make your research about this company, how they are handling their infrastructure. Try to understand, yeah, for common people, it's difficult to do so. But if you are really worried about it, you have to do your, let's say, the background check. If someone is coming to me to propose for my daughter or something like this, I will spend a couple of hours making a background check. Instead of counting blindly on the marketing or hearing something in the social media, you have to use your own resources. That's one of the mistakes at the moment. I see it really popular between the young age and the teenagers and the growing social media issues. In order to trust or to protect yourself from such things, you need to understand where it comes from, how to correctly work with it, and so on. If you want to get it to a more wider aspect, there is a regulation should be in place, there is market analysis should be, there is a lot of things. But start from yourself. Do your background check. That's my own opinion. I do it like this.
I think the example that you've given, because they're a bit sensitive because they affect the health of the human being. But at the same time, I think it applies to everything. So if your internet banking account can be hacked, right? You lose all your money. Your phone can be hacked. You lose all your personal pictures. Now autonomous cars can be hacked, and then someone can bump. They can. So the threat is there. you have to, as Mahmoud said, buy your product from a reputable company. And if, in the unlikely event, someone hacks this, then it's a criminal offense, and
At
then
least
should
you
be
know
punished.
who
And
to
they
call
will,
after.
Yeah.
To call the support after. You know who to call after.
No, I think those are all valid points. I think it's a reminder that the attack vector has really increased. I mean, there's so much more sort of signals and devices that hackers can target. Reminds me of the case with the UK NHS when they had, people's lives can be at risk, to your point, right? And there's so many scenarios. That's why one of the things we're doing, for example, we're calling for a national sort of Geneva Convention on security and on digital technology. I think there's a role that the industry can play to make sure those things are less likely, but also when they happen, how to respond, right? And the impact becomes a bit more mitigated. Again, in this specific case, how do you respond if this unlikely event happens? But I think it's a reminder to all of us of the scope of what we're dealing with, because it is in every aspect of our lives. So we really have to sort of look at this very holistically. So,
just a couple of things. One of the problems, though, is I think there's 100,000 health apps out there right now, and for a company to call themselves a health app company, they just have to basically be approved by Apple, and Apple's terms and conditions are vague enough that in many cases it's very hard to find what the privacy policy is for the company, and in many cases you're giving up all this information to a company that may have been started last week, maybe not last week, but maybe last year. And it's not just Fitbit's an interesting company. It just got bought by Google, so now all of that information that's coming off your heart sensors is going to be going into Google. And going back to kind of an interesting story that happened, there was a husband who was tracking his wife, and he noticed that she was going to a particular place, and her heart rate was very raised for a certain amount of time, and he kind of realized that she must have been cheating on him from that, and he was able to get the records from Fitbit to kind of prove that. So that kind of fits into where does the privacy come, who owns that data? Is it you? Is it your husband? Is it Fitbit, or is it Google? Or we sign away. I think my last point, Tinder actually, when you sign up for that app, keeps track of your gyroscope. Why on earth they want to care about what direction your phone is on? But it's kind of like, it's another example of just ridiculous data collection. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I love your stories, Andrew. Like the stories. Thank you.
Try to keep it entertaining.
Yeah, I hope we gave you insights, like practical ones, where you can take it back to your offices today and start implementing it on the spot. And actually, I enjoyed the panel a lot. Thank you again, all of you. Please, let's give them a great round of applause. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Hala, for a wonderful job. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our panel for today. I'd like to take a moment to thank all of our partners and sponsors once again. Our platinum partner, HumanSoft, our gold partner, GBM, and our innovation partners, Schneider Electric. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I'd like to thank all of the panelists, all of the moderators, but most importantly yourselves for being here today. We hope you enjoyed these discussions and panels as much as we did. And finally, we'd like to invite you and ask you to join us for lunch in the lobby. Once again, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and have a wonderful day.